The Civil War took away the problem of the slave versus free debate when they added states, and that made it easier to expand. However, borders had already been settled, so they had to look elsewhere, and looking elsewhere meant taking over other places, which raised the question whether or not the U.S. was imperialist. Expansion is required to become a world power, because you have to extend your influence globally, and the only way to do that is to expand. William Seward was one of the first people to understand this, well, not to understand this, to apply it in the U.S., and he was the Secretary of State for Lincoln and for Andrew Jackson. He wanted to take over Cuba, Haiti, the Virgin Islands, Greenland, Iceland, Alaska, and Hawaii. This guy was ambitious. And in 1867, he convinced, or bribed, Congress to sign a broker deal to buy Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. It was a laughingstock until oil was discovered, and it became a strategic point in the Cold War. However, Seward didn't live to see either of these things, and so he died thinking that everyone thought he was stupid, which they did at the time. In 1869, Ulysses S. Grant wanted to take over Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic because it had natural harbors, it had valuable mineral resources, and the population could be used as a consumer market. Buenaventura Baez tried to sell the Dominican Republic. He was the guy in charge, and they even wrote up a treaty of annexation. It was written to buy the Dominican Republic. However, the Senate refused it because the U.S. citizens weren't ready, because they didn't want the U.S. to be imperialistic. It just went against how our country was founded. We were breaking away from an imperialist. We don't want to become one. William Evarts was the Secretary of State under President Hayes. He wanted a commercial relationship with Latin America and Asian countries, and James G. Blaine was the Secretary of State under Garfield. He wanted to establish peace and reciprocity with Latin America. In the 1880s, preventative factors were pretty much gone, so the expansion began. But the preventative factors included reconstruction, populating the land we had by using railroads, Native Americans, because we didn't have a good relationship with them, and we even had some wars, for example, the Plain Wars, and economic issues in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. There were lots of depressions. The expansion mindset changed because of those internal issues being resolved, and they realized that it would be good for the business because they had spread through the United States, and they saw how business boomed when it went from being regional to national. So they realized that having a global market would just make the economy boom, and after those depressions, they were ready for that. Also, because of the depressions, the consumers were buying less, so the businesses had to go elsewhere, or else they were making less. And going elsewhere and selling elsewhere meant going international, and so they had to have that global market. The third reason is that bases in the rest of the world are the best defense, because the best defense is a good offense. If you prevent the problems before they arise, you don't have to worry about it. Also, American exceptionalism was a popular belief. Many people believed that it was the right thing to do and our responsibility to expand and help other countries and show them that our way is better. They used that as a justification to expand. That wasn't their reason for expanding, but that's how they justified it. It helps us and it's helping other people. However, when other countries didn't want our help, we took that as confirmation that we are superior and they're just idiots. Because really, who wouldn't want to be like us? Other countries didn't want help, though. They wanted to figure it out themselves and make their own way and their own mistakes. They didn't want to be inferior to the United States. And the sixth reason is that individuals with power promoted it. So it really helps when you've got a bunch of higher-ups saying, hey, maybe expanding might not be so bad. Expansion requires military strength. This means the Navy, particularly. Unfortunately, our Navy kind of sucked, so we had to build that up. There were very few people and very few ships, and the few ships that we had were wooden. That's not so great. In 1883, Chester A. Arthur asked Congress to strengthen the Navy, and by 1890, the Navy was some pretty hot stuff. It was pretty awesome. It was getting better. Benjamin Tracy was the Secretary of War for President Harrison. He thought that if we have the means, we'll be less likely to be obliterated. And so he got armored vessels and 2 separate fleets, which makes sense because we have 2 coastlines, one in the Pacific and one in the Atlantic. Captain Alfred T. Mahan said that the influence, wrote the influence of sea power on history. And it said that if you want national greatness, you need a strong navy, and you need a foreign commercial market and a navy to protect it. He did a case study, and all of the major world powers in history had amazing navies. And he really influenced Tracy, the guy who wrote the armored vessels and such. In 1901, Theodore Roosevelt said that if you're prepared for war, it's the best way to defend against it. Some examples of aggressive foreign policy, because the U.S. was getting pretty aggressive. In 1875, we were trading with Hawaii for sugar, and we had duty-free trade, which means that we weren't placing tariffs on the sugar. We wanted Hawaii because it had a strategic location. It was larger than Pago Pago, which will be mentioned in a minute or two, because they had natives that would be a great commercial market, and they had a lot of resources. And so, in 1887, we had exclusive rights to Pearl Harbor. However, in 1890, the McKinley tariff was passed, and that is the largest tariff the U.S. has ever created. It made it so that there was no more duty-free sugar, and consequently, Hawaii started to question the relationship it had with the U.S. I mean, they were hurting the trade. What's up with that? So in 1891, Queen Liliuokalani, sorry if I mispronounced that, comes to power, and she was concerned about the relationship. She was very anti-American, and in January, Harrison tried to annex Hawaii. He failed. And that's because Harrison was pretty much a lame-duck, well, not pretty much, he was a lame-duck president. He was not reelected for a second term, and so he was basically just waiting for the next president to come in. And the next president was President Cleveland, and Cleveland was very anti-imperialist, so the whole annexing Hawaii was not going to flow. Cleveland said that he'd reinstate the Queen if she pardoned all the people who overthrew her, but she wasn't willing to do that. You gotta admire her willingness to stand up for what she believed in. So, that is the first example. The second example is Apia and Pago Pago. Those are 2 of the 14 Samoan islands. They're volcanic formed islands in the South Pacific. The U.S. and Germany were interested in the ports and for the shipping industry. Germany was the main competition. In 1878, we formally committed ourselves to the cause. We said that we'd protect them, and as long as they'd look out for us. But we didn't really get any preferential treatment because a lot of other companies were already doing the same thing, so it didn't really do much. In 1887, we tried to work out an agreement with Germany, but that didn't work out too well. In 1889, the U.S. had a fleet in the Samoas to anticipate war with Germany because the peace thing didn't work out. So we almost went to war, and we would have, but a typhoon came through and it destroyed all of the vessels for Germany and the U.S. So no war happened, and instead they negotiated in Berlin, ironically enough. The Samoans weren't there. They negotiated on how they would break up the Samoan Islands. The the US got Pago Pago, and Germany got Apia. In 1891, the revolution in Germany, this is the third example, occurred. In October, U.S. Was concerned about the instability of Chile because of the revolutionaries and whether or not the Europeans would take over. So they sent out the USS Baltimore to the shores of Chile to observe. Chile thought the U.S. was going to try to intervene, and so they became very anti-American, and they had anti-American protests. The American soldiers went ashore for rest and relaxation and fun, but they were greeted with fights and mob violence. 2 U.S. Soldiers were killed and 16 U.S. soldiers were injured. The Chilean government did nothing to put these down, and instead they put the survivors in prison. This made the U.S. people angry, and the president and the public wanted revenge. Chile backed down and released the soldiers. And the fourth and final example is in the 1890s. Venezuela and British Guiana were having a border dispute because of a gold discovery, and that made it violent. So to settle it, Richard Olney demanded that the U.S. be the arbitrator. Arbitrators are countries that are is a country that is chosen by the 2 fighting countries. They're supposed to be impartial and mutually chosen, but Richard Olney demanded that the U.S. be the arbitrator, and he used the Monroe Doctrine to do it, which is kind of ironic because when we passed the Monroe Doctrine, the British were very much in favor of it. However, they did not want us to be the arbitrator because it was in our hemisphere, so they figured that we would be very, very partial to Venezuela. However, Britain backed down when we prepared for war, and in the end we gave Britain almost everything they wanted, so they got the good end of it. The arbitration actually happened in 1895. The effects of this, the important part, is that Grover Cleveland stood up and beat Great Britain, which is very, very impressive for the time period. The Monroe Doctrine was taken to a new level, and the U.S. looked stronger. And that is the end of expansionism.